The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of my bedroom, casting a soft golden glow across the hardwood floors I had personally selected 3 years ago when I designed this house. It was a Saturday in late September, and the crisp Atlanta air carried the promise of autumn, my favorite season. I stood in front of my vanity mirror, putting the finishing touches on my makeup for the Georgia Architecture Association's annual gala, an event where I would be receiving an award for sustainable design innovation. It was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my career. I reached for my jewelry box, a hand-carved mahogany piece that had belonged to my grandmother Eleanor, and opened it with the familiar anticipation I always felt when touching something that connected me to her. My fingers searched for the sapphire pendant, the centerpiece of my collection, and the piece I had specifically planned to wear tonight. The sapphire had been my grandmother's most treasured possession, given to her by my grandfather on their 25th wedding anniversary. She had worn it to every important event in her life, and she had passed it to me on her deathbed, pressing it into my palm with trembling fingers while making me promise to wear it whenever I needed her strength. But the sapphire was not there. I felt my heart skip as I pushed aside other pieces, certain I had simply overlooked it. The pendant had a specific spot in the upper right compartment, nestled in blue velvet, where it had rested for the past 8 years since Grandma Eleanor passed. My fingers found only empty velvet. I took a breath, telling myself not to panic. Perhaps I had moved it. Perhaps I had worn it recently and placed it somewhere else. But even as I tried to calm myself, a cold sensation began to spread through my chest because I knew my habits. I was meticulous about my grandmother's jewelry. Every piece had its place, and I never deviated from that system. I searched the entire box more carefully, and that was when I noticed other absences. The ruby earrings that had belonged to my great-aunt Josephine were missing. The Art Deco bracelet from the 1920s, a piece my grandmother had inherited from her own mother, was gone. The emerald ring that Grandma Eleanor had worn on her right hand for 50 years, the one she called her courage stone, had vanished. My hands began to tremble as I counted what remained. Out of the 14 pieces of heirloom jewelry I had inherited, only 6 remained in the box. 8 pieces were missing. 8 irreplaceable connections to my family history, to the women who had come before me, to my grandmother who had loved me more than anyone else in this world. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my carefully applied makeup suddenly feeling like a mask I could not bear to wear. The gala seemed impossibly far away, a concern from another lifetime. All I could think about was where my grandmother's jewelry had gone and how I had failed to notice their disappearance. The bedroom door opened and Derek walked in, already dressed in the custom suit I had bought him for the occasion. My husband of 6 years was a handsome man, tall with broad shoulders and a smile that had charmed me from the moment we met at a mutual friend's birthday party. He had been attentive then, interested in my work, supportive of my ambitions. Somewhere along the way, that man had faded into someone I barely recognized, someone who spent more than he earned, who expected comfort without contributing to it, who had slowly but surely become an extension of his mother rather than a partner to his wife. "You're not ready yet?" he asked, checking his watch. "We need to leave in 30 minutes. I looked up at him, searching his face for something, though I was not sure what. "Derek, have you seen my sapphire pendant? The one from my grandmother?" Something flickered across his features, so quickly that I almost missed it. It was there and gone in less than a second, a tightening around his eyes, a slight tension in his jaw. "No, I haven't. Did you check the box?" "The box is where I always keep it. It's not there. Neither are several other pieces." He shrugged, walking to the mirror to adjust his tie. "Maybe you moved them and forgot. You've been busy with that Henderson project." I watched him in the mirror, watched the way he avoided meeting my eyes, the way his fingers fumbled slightly with the silk of his tie. In 6 years of marriage, I had learned to read Derek's body language, and right now, everything about him screamed discomfort. "I didn't move them," I said quietly. "I never move them." "You know that." "Well, they didn't just walk away, Rachel." His voice carried an edge of irritation that felt disproportionate to the conversation. "Look, we don't have time for this right now. You have other jewelry. Wear something else, and we'll look for the sapphire tomorrow. Wear something else. As if my grandmother's sapphire was interchangeable with any other piece of jewelry. As if the history and love embedded in that pendant meant nothing. I did not argue. I did not press further. Something in my gut told me to wait, to watch, to pay attention in ways I had not been paying attention before. So I selected a simple gold chain from my non-heirloom collection, finished getting ready, and allowed Derek to escort me to the gala where I smiled and accepted my award and pretended that my world had not just shifted on its axis. The event passed in a blur. I remember shaking hands and making small talk, remembering names and projects and deadlines because that was what I had trained myself to do. I remember Derek charming the wives of my colleagues while I discussed sustainable materials with potential clients. I remember thinking that to anyone watching, we must have looked like the perfect, successful couple, the architect and her supportive husband, building a beautiful life together. But all I could think about was the empty spaces in my jewelry box. When we returned home, I pleaded exhaustion and went straight to bed while Derek stayed downstairs, claiming he wanted to watch television. I lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of my house, the house I had designed from the foundation up, the house I had paid for with every cent coming from my own accounts. Derek had contributed nothing to its purchase or construction. His salary from the car dealership where he worked in sales barely covered his personal expenses, his clothes, his golf club membership, his weekly poker games with friends. I had never minded being the primary breadwinner. I had never minded that my success afforded us a lifestyle that Derek's income alone could never provide. I believed in partnership, in supporting each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. What I minded, what I was beginning to realize I had minded for longer than I wanted to admit, was the lack of appreciation, the expectation, the entitlement that had crept into our marriage so gradually that I had not noticed until it had become the foundation of our dynamic. And now, 8 pieces of my grandmother's jewelry were missing. I thought about my grandmother as I lay there in the dark. Eleanor May Johnson had been born in rural Georgia in 1935, the daughter of sharecroppers who had nothing but their dignity and their faith. She had worked her way through secretarial school, married my grandfather, who became one of the first black dentists in our county, and built a life of quiet elegance and fierce pride. The jewelry she collected over the years was not just adornment. Each piece represented a milestone, a triumph, a moment when she and my grandfather had defied the expectations placed upon black families in the Jim Crow South. The sapphire pendant had been purchased in 1975, the year my grandfather's practice finally became profitable enough for him to buy his wife the gift he had been promising her for 2 decades. The ruby earrings commemorated my grandmother's 50th birthday. The emerald ring was a gift she bought for herself after her first grandchild, my older brother Marcus, was born. Each piece had a story, a meaning, a connection to a legacy that could not be measured in monetary value. And someone had taken them from my box. The next morning, I woke before Derek and went to his home office, a space he rarely used but insisted on having when I designed the house. I was not sure what I was looking for, but I felt compelled to search. His desk was cluttered with golf magazines and old sales reports, nothing unusual. His filing cabinet contained tax documents and car brochures. I was about to give up when I noticed his laptop was open, the screen dark but not locked. I touched the trackpad and the screen illuminated to reveal his email inbox. The most recent message was from his mother, Linda, sent just 2 days ago. The subject line read, "Thank you, baby." I knew I should not read it. I knew that reading a spouse's private correspondence was a violation of trust, a boundary I had never crossed in 6 years of marriage. But 8 pieces of my grandmother's jewelry were missing, and my husband had looked me in the eye and lied about it. I clicked on the email. "Derek, the earrings are even more beautiful than the photos. Ruby is my color, everyone says so. I wore them to church on Sunday, and Diane Patterson nearly fell out of her pew with jealousy. That woman has always thought she was better than everyone else. But now she knows that my son takes care of me better than her sorry children take care of her. Thank you for always thinking of your mama. I know Rachel doesn't appreciate these things the way I do. She's too busy with her buildings and her awards to understand real elegance. These pieces deserve to be worn by someone who knows their value. Love always, Mama. I read the email 3 times, each reading carving a deeper wound into my heart. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely scroll down to see the rest of the thread. There were dozens of emails between them, spanning years. References to a bracelet, to a brooch, to a pair of pearl earrings I had forgotten were even missing. My husband had been stealing my grandmother's jewelry and giving it to his mother, and Linda, my mother-in-law, who had smiled at my face at every family dinner, who had accepted my hospitality in the guest house I had built specifically for her comfort, who had eaten my food and enjoyed my home and benefited from my success, believed that I did not deserve my own grandmother's legacy. I closed the laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the guest house where Linda lived rent-free, utilities included, every comfort provided by my generosity. I thought about all the times she had made subtle comments about my career, suggesting that I worked too much, that I prioritized my buildings over my family, that a real wife would be more attentive to her husband's needs. I thought about how Derek always defended her, always took her side, always made me feel like I was being too sensitive. I thought about my grandmother, who had entrusted me with her legacy, and I felt like I had betrayed her. But beneath the hurt, beneath the shock and the grief and the overwhelming sense of violation, something else was beginning to emerge. It was small at first, just a spark in the darkness of my despair. But as I stood at that window and watched the sun rise over my property, the property I had earned with my own talent and labor, that spark began to grow. I was not going to let this stand. I was not going to let them steal my grandmother's memory and get away with it. But I was also not going to react emotionally, not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. I was going to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went, and then I was going to make them understand the true cost of their disrespect. Chapter 2, The Ugly Truth. The days following my discovery were a masterclass in self-control. I went to work, met with clients, reviewed blueprints, and attended meetings with the same professional demeanor I had cultivated over 12 years in the architecture industry. I came home, prepared meals, engaged in surface-level conversations with my husband, and even shared Sunday dinner with Linda in my dining room, watching her eat my food while wearing my great-aunt's ruby earrings. She made no attempt to hide them. Why would she? In her mind, those earrings were rightfully hers now, gifts from her devoted son who understood that his mother deserved beautiful things. I said nothing about the earrings. I complimented her outfit instead, told her the red suited her complexion, and watched as she preened under the praise, completely oblivious to the storm gathering behind my calm exterior. Derek sat at the head of the table I had purchased, in the house I had built, eating the roast I had prepared, and he smiled at his mother with such genuine warmth that I almost wondered if he had convinced himself he had done nothing wrong. Perhaps he had. Perhaps in his mind, what belonged to his wife ultimately belonged to him, and what belonged to him could be shared with his mother as he saw fit. Perhaps he had never truly seen me as a separate person with my own history, my own legacy, my own sacred connections to the women who had shaped me. Perhaps I had never been more than a provider in his eyes, a source of comfort and resources to be distributed according to his preferences. These thoughts consumed me as I began my investigation in earnest. I started with our financial records, accessing the joint account statements that I rarely examined because I trusted my husband to be honest about his spending. That trust now seemed laughably naive. What I found in those statements painted a picture of systematic deception spanning our entire marriage. Derek had been transferring money to Linda every month for 5 years. The amounts varied, sometimes a few $100s, sometimes over 1,000, but they were consistent and deliberate FI. He had labeled them as various expenses in our budgeting app, car repairs, work equipment, professional development, things I would never think to question. Over 5 years, he had funneled nearly $40,000 to his mother, $40,000 of money that came primarily from my income, given that his sales commissions rarely covered more than his personal indulgences. But the money, as significant as it was, paled in comparison to the jewelry. I spent an evening cataloging what remained in my grandmother's box and comparing it to my memory of the complete collection. The sapphire pendant, the ruby earrings, the emerald ring, the Art Deco bracelet, a pair of pearl drop earrings, a gold filigree brooch, a cameo necklace, and an opal ring. 8 pieces spanning 4 generations of women in my family, each one carrying memories and meaning that could never be quantified. I needed proof. Not for myself, because I already knew the truth, but for what might come next. I needed documentation, evidence, a record of betrayal that could not be disputed or explained away. So I did something I had never imagined myself capable of doing. I ordered a small wireless camera online, the kind designed for home security, and I installed it in my living room, positioned to capture the jewelry box and the doorway. The waiting was agonizing. Every day I checked the footage, watching hours of empty rooms and mundane movements. Derek walking past, me opening the box to check on my remaining pieces. Linda stopping by to borrow sugar she did not need, an excuse to wander through my home and assess my possessions. I began to notice how her eyes lingered on certain objects: the crystal vase on the mantel, the antique clock in the hallway, the artwork I had collected over the years. She looked at my belongings the way a shopper looks at merchandise, calculating value and desirability. On the 9th day of my surveillance, I captured what I needed. The footage showed Derek entering the living room around 2 in the afternoon, while I was at a client meeting downtown. He moved with purpose, no hesitation or uncertainty in his steps. He went directly to my jewelry box, opened it, and removed the cameo necklace, a Victorian piece that my great-grandmother had received as a wedding gift in 1920. He examined it briefly, turned it over in his hands, and then slipped it into his pocket as casually as if he were pocketing his own keys. He closed the box, looked around the room once, and left. I watched him betray me with such ease, such practiced nonchalance, and I understood that this was not a new behavior. This was routine. This was comfortable. This was a man who had been stealing from his wife for years and had never once felt the weight of his actions. I followed him that afternoon. I left my client meeting early, claiming a family emergency, and I drove to my house just in time to see Derek's car pulling out of the driveway. I kept a safe distance, 3 or 4 car lengths behind, as he navigated through the tree-lined streets of our neighborhood toward his mother's guest house. But he did not stop there. Instead, he continued past the main house, out of our property, and drove 15 minutes to a neighborhood across town where Linda's sister Denise lived. I parked across the street and watched as Derek entered Denise's house without knocking. Through the large front window, I could see figures moving, and then Linda appeared, emerging from somewhere in the back of the house. Of course, she was not at the guest house because she was here, at her sister's, waiting for her son to deliver his latest tribute. I got out of my car and walked toward the house, not sure what I intended to do, but unable to simply sit and watch from a distance. As I approached the window, I heard voices, muffled but distinguishable. I positioned myself beside a large hydrangea bush, hidden from view but close enough to hear. "Oh, Derek, it's beautiful." Linda's voice carried a note of genuine delight. "Is this the one from the 1800s? "Yes, Mama, the cameo." "I know you've always admired it. That woman doesn't even wear these pieces. They just sit in that box collecting dust while she's off designing buildings for strangers. These jewels deserve to be appreciated, to be seen. I'm going to wear this to the Pattersons' anniversary party next month. Can you imagine Diane's face? You'll be the most elegant woman there, Mama. You always are." I pressed my hand against the brick wall of the house, steadying myself against the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. That woman. My husband referred to me as that woman when speaking to his mother. Not Rachel. Not his wife. That woman. I still say she doesn't deserve all that she has. Linda's voice had taken on a harder edge. Working all the time, acting like she's better than everyone because she designs fancy buildings. A real wife would take care of her home, take care of her husband. Instead, you're living in that big house like a guest while she treats you like a servant. Mama, it's not that bad. Not that bad? Baby, she controls everything. The money, the house, the cars. You don't even have your name on the deed. What kind of wife does that to her husband? I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst through that door and tell Linda exactly what kind of wife does that. A wife who earned every penny herself. A wife who designed and built that house with her own vision and labor. A wife who had offered to put Derek's name on the deed, only to have him wave it off, saying he didn't care about such things. A wife who had provided Linda with a rent-free home, who had included her in every holiday and celebration, who had tried for 6 years to build a relationship with a woman who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. But I did not burst through the door. I did not scream. I stood beside that hydrangea bush and listened as my husband and his mother continued to dissect my character, my choices, my worth as a woman and a wife. I listened as Linda tried on my grandmother's cameo and declared it perfect against her skin. I listened as Derek promised to look for more pieces she might like. And then I heard something that stopped my heart. "What about that sapphire?" Linda asked. "The big one, the pendant. That's the real prize." "I already got it for you, Mama. Don't you remember? Last year, for your birthday." "That was last year?" My memory isn't what it used to be. I thought that was the emerald. The emerald was 2 years ago. The sapphire was last September. It's in your safe deposit box. Linda laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I have so many of her things now I can't keep track. You're a good son, Derek. The best son a mother could ask for. The sapphire pendant, my grandmother's most treasured possession. The piece she had pressed into my palm as she lay dying, making me promise to wear it when I needed her strength. It had been gone for a year, a full year, and I had not noticed because I had trusted that it was safe, that it was waiting for me, that the people sharing my home would never violate something so sacred. I walked back to my car on legs that felt like they might collapse beneath me. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at nothing, trying to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. My husband had been systematically stealing my inheritance for years. My mother-in-law had been receiving these stolen goods with full knowledge of their origin. Together, they had decided that I was unworthy of my own family legacy, that the pieces my grandmother had entrusted to me belonged more rightfully to a woman who had done nothing but criticize and belittle me since the day I married her son. I drove home in a daze, parked in my garage, and sat in the darkness for a long time. I thought about my grandmother, about the stories she used to tell me when I was a child. Stories about survival and dignity, about building something from nothing, about the importance of knowing your worth even when the world tries to convince you that you have none. She had faced discrimination and hardship that I could barely imagine, and she had emerged with her head held high and her spirit unbroken. What would she tell me to do now? I knew the answer. She would tell me to protect myself. She would tell me that love does not mean allowing yourself to be robbed and disrespected. She would tell me that a woman who does not value herself will never be valued by others. I went inside and began to make a list. The jewelry that was missing, the money that had been transferred, the property that was in my name, the assets I had accumulated before and during my marriage. I was going to need all of this information soon, because I was done being the provider for people who saw me as nothing more than a source of resources. But before I could act, I needed to understand my legal position. I needed to know what options were available to me and what consequences I could legitimately impose. I needed to be strategic, not emotional. I needed to approach this the way I approached every challenging project in my career, with research, planning, and meticulous attention to detail. I picked up my phone and sent a text to my oldest friend, Melissa Chen, who had been my roommate at Georgia Tech and was now one of the most successful family law attorneys in Atlanta. "I need to talk to you," I wrote. "Something has happened and I need legal advice. Can you meet me tomorrow?" Her response came within minutes. "Of course. My office, 9 a.m. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." I put down my phone and looked around my beautiful living room, at the furniture I had selected, the artwork I had collected, the space I had designed to be a sanctuary of peace and creativity. This was my home. These were my belongings. My grandmother's jewelry was my inheritance, my connection to a lineage of strong Black women who had built legacies against impossible odds. Derek and Linda had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that my kindness was weakness, that my generosity was stupidity, that my love was unconditional and inexhaustible. They had taken and taken and taken, never once considering that there might be consequences. They were about to learn otherwise. Melissa's office occupied the 23rd floor of a glass tower in Midtown Atlanta, with panoramic views of the city I loved and had helped shape through my architectural work. I arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, carrying a folder thick with documentation I had compiled over the previous sleepless night. Bank statements, screenshots of emails, still frames from the surveillance footage, a detailed inventory of the missing jewelry with estimated values, and, more importantly, documented provenance proving each piece was my separate property inherited before marriage. My friend greeted me with a hug that lasted longer than usual, her eyes searching my face with the concern of someone who had known me for nearly 2 decades. Melissa and I had survived college together, had celebrated each other's graduations and career milestones, had stood beside each other at our respective weddings. She had never particularly liked Derek, though she had kept that opinion mostly to herself out of respect for my choices. Now, as I laid out the evidence of his betrayal on her conference table, I could see validation mixing with anger in her expression. "Rachel, this is theft." Her voice was quiet but firm. "These pieces were your separate property, inherited before the marriage, kept separately, never commingled with marital assets. He had no right to give them to anyone. Can I get them back?" "Yes, we can file a civil action for recovery of stolen property. We can also potentially pursue criminal charges, though that's a separate process and depends on the district attorney's willingness to prosecute." She paused, looking at the inventory list. "The estimated value here is significant. We're talking about felony-level theft." I nodded, having already calculated the numbers. The 8 pieces, based on recent appraisals I had obtained for insurance purposes, were worth collectively over $80,000. But their true value, the value measured in memory and meaning and connection to my ancestors, was beyond any price. "What about the house?" I asked. "The cars? Everything we own?" Melissa pulled up a legal database on her computer and began typing. "Let's look at your assets. The house on Cascade Road, purchased in 2019, is titled solely in your name. Derek signed a quitclaim deed at closing, correct?" "Yes, he said he didn't care about having his name on the deed, that he trusted me completely." The irony of that statement burned in my throat. "Smart decision on your part, even if you didn't realize it at the time. The house is your separate property. He has no claim to it." She continued scrolling. "The vehicles. You have a Mercedes registered in your name only, and he has a BMW that's also registered in your name. Is that correct?" "Yes, I bought both cars. He never had the credit score to finance a vehicle on his own." "So technically you own both vehicles." Melissa made a note. "What about the guest house where his mother lives?" "I built it as an addition to the property 3 years ago. It's on my land, constructed with my money, and there's no lease agreement. Linda lives there as a guest, rent-free, with all utilities included, which means she has no tenant rights. She's a licensee, essentially a guest who can be asked to leave at any time." Melissa sat back in her chair and looked at me with something like admiration. "Rachel, do you realize what position you're in? You own everything. The house, the cars, the property. Your income is approximately 4 times what Derek earns. In a divorce scenario, not only would you not owe him anything, but you could potentially recover the assets he's stolen and misappropriated." The word divorce hung in the air between us. I had not said it yet, had not allowed myself to think it explicitly. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of building what I thought was a partnership, and it had come to this. A conference table covered in evidence of betrayal, a legal strategy session with my oldest friend, and the growing certainty that the man I had married was not someone I could remain married to. "I need time to think," I said. "About the divorce, I mean. But in the meantime, what can I do to protect myself?" Melissa outlined a plan. First, I should separate my finances entirely, opening new accounts in my name only and redirecting my income away from any joint accounts. Second, I should document everything, continuing to gather evidence of the theft and any other misconduct I might discover. Third, I should consult with a criminal attorney about the possibility of pressing charges, which could provide leverage in negotiations later. And fourth, I should begin preparing for the likelihood that this marriage was ending, updating my will, reviewing beneficiary designations, and ensuring that my assets were protected. I left her office with a clear sense of purpose and a legal foundation for the actions I was contemplating. Over the following week, I implemented every element of her plan. I opened new checking and savings accounts at a different bank, transferred my direct deposit, and began routing all household expenses through accounts that Derek could not access. I moved my most important documents to a safe deposit box he did not know existed. I consulted with a criminal defense attorney who confirmed that what Derek had done constituted felony theft, and that Linda could potentially be charged as a receiver of stolen property. Through all of this, I maintained the facade of normalcy at home. I cooked dinners and made small talk and pretended that nothing had changed. Derek seemed oblivious to my activities, too absorbed in his own world of golf games and poker nights and secret visits to his mother to notice that his wife was quietly dismantling the life he took for granted. The following Saturday, Linda announced that she was hosting a family dinner at the main house. This was not unusual. She often commandeered my kitchen for gatherings that she presented as her own hospitality, accepting compliments for meals prepared with ingredients I had purchased, in a space I had designed, using equipment I had selected. I had allowed this for years because I wanted peace, because I valued family harmony, because I told myself that generosity was its own reward. That night, I watched with new eyes as Derek's relatives filled my home. His aunts and uncles and cousins, people I had welcomed into my life and treated as my own family. Linda held court at the head of my dining table, regaling everyone with stories of her son's devotion, her wonderful life, her many blessings. She was wearing my grandmother's emerald ring on her right hand, the courage stone that had given Grandma Eleanor strength through segregation and loss and 1,000 daily indignities. I felt something shift inside me as I stared at that ring. Some final thread of tolerance or denial or hope snapped, and what remained was clarity. Pure, cold, absolute clarity. "Linda, what a beautiful ring." The words came out of my mouth before I had consciously decided to speak. The table fell quiet, everyone turning to look at me. "I don't think I've ever seen you wear it before. Where did you get it?" Linda's hand twitched, a tiny involuntary movement that she quickly controlled. "This old thing? It was my mother's. A family heirloom." "Really? It looks exactly like a ring my grandmother used to own. An emerald surrounded by small diamonds in a platinum setting. Art Deco style, probably from the 1930s. "Well, lots of rings look similar, dear." Linda's smile was fixed, her eyes hard. "I'm sure your grandmother had lovely taste." "She did. She called that particular ring her courage stone. She wore it every day for 50 years. I held Linda's gaze across the table, watching the color drain from her face. "Strange coincidence, isn't it?" Derek intervened, his voice too loud and too jovial. "Rachel, honey, why don't you bring out the dessert? I'm sure everyone's ready for something sweet." I smiled at my husband, a smile that felt like a blade. "Of course, I'll be right back." I retreated to the kitchen and stood at the counter, my hands gripping the edge of the marble I had chosen for its beauty and durability. I could hear the murmur of conversation resuming in the dining room. Linda's laugh a little too bright, Derek's voice a little too animated. They thought they had deflected my observation. They thought the moment had passed. They were wrong. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I served dessert and accepted compliments and played the role of gracious hostess while cataloging every detail for later examination. The way Linda touched the emerald ring when she thought no one was watching. The way Derek avoided my eyes. The way the family dynamics revolved around Linda as the matriarch, with me relegated to the position of service provider, present but not central, necessary but not valued. After everyone left and Derek had gone to bed, I sat in my home office and reviewed my notes. I had photographs of Linda wearing 4 different pieces of my grandmother's jewelry at various family events over the past 3 years. I had bank statements showing years of unauthorized transfers. I had email threads documenting their conspiracy and their contempt. I had surveillance footage of Derek stealing from my jewelry box. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was clear. All that remained was deciding what to do with it. I thought about forgiveness. I thought about confrontation and confession and the possibility of reconciliation. I thought about what my grandmother would say, what advice she would offer if she were still alive to guide me. And I kept coming back to the same conclusion. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. Some violations cannot be repaired with apologies or promises. When the people who are supposed to love you view you as a resource to be exploited, when they steal your heritage and mock your worth, when they smile at your face while plotting against your interests, the only appropriate response is to protect yourself by removing them from your life. I was not going to rage or weep or plead. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I was going to present the facts, state my position, and let them experience the natural consequences of their choices. They had treated me like I was nothing. They were about to discover that without me, they had nothing. I set my plan in motion. I scheduled a family meeting for the following Sunday, telling Derek and Linda that I wanted to discuss some important matters regarding our future. They agreed without suspicion, probably assuming I wanted to talk about renovating the guest house or planning a family vacation. They had no idea what was coming, and for the first time since I discovered the empty spaces in my jewelry box, I felt something like peace, the clarity of purpose, the calm that comes from knowing exactly what you need to do and having the strength to do it. My grandmother's courage stone was still on Linda's finger, but the courage itself, the real courage, was in my heart where it had always been. The Sunday of the family meeting arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that felt almost mocking in its beauty. Golden sunlight streamed through the windows of my living room, illuminating the space I had designed to be a haven of warmth and welcome. The irony was not lost on me that this room, created with such love and intention, would now become the stage for the most difficult conversation of my life. I had prepared everything with the meticulous attention to detail that had made me successful in my career. A folder containing copies of all my evidence sat on the coffee table. My laptop was open to the surveillance footage, paused at the moment Derek removed the cameo necklace from my jewelry box. The bank statements were organized chronologically, with the unauthorized transfers highlighted in yellow. Beside all of this sat the most important document of all, a formal demand letter drafted by Melissa, requesting the immediate return of all stolen property. Derek and Linda arrived together, which told me everything I needed to know about their assumption of solidarity. They walked into my living room with the comfortable arrogance of people who believed themselves secure, Linda settling into the armchair she always claimed as her own, Derek taking his usual spot on the sofa. Neither of them seemed to notice the documents on the table, or if they did, they dismissed them as work materials. "So what's this about, Rachel?" Linda asked, her tone carrying the slight condescension that I had learned to recognize as her default mode of addressing me. "Derek said you wanted to discuss something important." I remained standing, positioning myself near the fireplace where I could see both of them clearly. "I want to talk about my grandmother's jewelry." The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. I watched Derek's face cycle through surprise, confusion, and fear in rapid succession. Linda's expression hardened into something defensive and hostile. "What about it?" Derek asked, his voice carefully neutral. "It's missing. 8 pieces of heirloom jewelry that my grandmother left to me have disappeared from my jewelry box over the past several years. The sapphire pendant she gave me on her deathbed, the ruby earrings from my great-aunt Josephine, the emerald ring she called her courage stone." I paused, letting each item land like a stone dropped into still water. The Art Deco bracelet, the pearl drops, the gold filigree brooch, the cameo necklace, the opal ring. All gone. "That's terrible," Linda said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Have you reported it to the police?" "It must have been a burglar." "There was no burglar." I picked up the laptop and turned the screen toward them. There was only Derek. I pressed play, and the room filled with the silent footage of my husband walking into the living room, opening my jewelry box, removing the cameo necklace, and slipping it into his pocket. The video was clear and damning, every detail visible in the afternoon light. Derek's face went gray as he watched himself commit the theft he had thought was secret. "This is from 3 weeks ago," I said, pausing the video. "But I know this wasn't the first time. I have email records going back years. Communications between you and your mother discussing the pieces you've taken, the ones she deserves, the ones too good for that woman to keep in a box." I opened the email folder and began reading selected passages aloud. The message thanking Derek for the ruby earrings. The discussion of which piece to take next. The disparaging comments about my character, my worth, my failure to appreciate real elegance. With each quote, I watched Linda's composure crack a little more, her face flushing with anger rather than shame. "You've been spying on us," she spat. "Reading private communications, installing cameras in your own home like some kind of paranoid lunatic. I was protecting my property from thieves." My voice remained steady, though my heart was pounding. "The jewelry you've been receiving from Derek doesn't belong to him. It never did. Every piece was my separate inheritance, documented, appraised, and legally mine. What Derek has been doing is theft. What you've been doing is receiving stolen property. Both are felonies under Georgia law." Derek finally found his voice. "Rachel, listen, I can explain. I didn't think you would miss them. You never wear that old stuff anyway, and Mama loves beautiful things. I was just trying to make her happy. By stealing from me. By taking the only physical connection I have to my grandmother, to my great-aunt, to the women in my family who survived things you can't even imagine. You gave away my heritage because your mother wanted pretty accessories for church. They're just things, Rachel." His tone was pleading now, desperate. "Objects. They're not worth destroying our marriage over. You destroyed our marriage the first time you opened my jewelry box and took something that wasn't yours. You destroyed it every time you looked me in the eye and lied. You destroyed it when you sat at my table, in my house, eating my food, while calling me that woman behind my back." I turned to Linda, who had been uncharacteristically silent during this exchange. "And you. I welcomed you into my home. I built you a guest house on my property. I paid your utilities, included you in every family gathering, treated you with respect even when you offered me nothing but criticism and contempt. And in return, you conspired with your son to rob me of my grandmother's legacy." Linda's chin lifted, defiance replacing her momentary discomfort. "Those pieces were wasted on you. You don't appreciate fine things? You're too busy with your career and your buildings to understand what elegance means. A working woman like you doesn't need jewelry like that. A working woman like me earned everything in this room. Everything you're sitting on, everything you're looking at, everything you've been enjoying for the past 6 years. The house, the cars, the lifestyle, all of it came from my work. Derek's salary barely covers his golf membership." "How dare you?" Linda rose from the chair, her voice rising with her. "My son has supported you, been a partner to you, and this is how you repay him? By throwing his finances in his face? His finances?" I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Derek has contributed almost nothing to this household. I have the bank records to prove it. I also have records showing that he's been funneling money to you for years, money that came from my income, used to support your lifestyle while you complained about me to anyone who would listen." I picked up the demand letter and held it out to Linda. "This is a formal request for the return of all stolen property within 24 hours. Every piece of jewelry that was taken from my home. If the items are not returned by tomorrow evening, I will be filing a police report and pursuing both criminal charges and civil action for the recovery of my property." Linda snatched the letter from my hand and scanned it quickly. "You can't be serious. These were gifts from my son. Your son had no right to give away property that didn't belong to him. The jewelry is documented as my separate inheritance. Any court will recognize that." "We'll fight this," Linda declared. "We'll hire a lawyer and prove that those pieces were marital property. You're welcome to try. But while you're fighting a losing legal battle, you should also start looking for a new place to live." I turned to Derek, who looked like he might be sick. "Both of you. I want you out of my house within 30 days. Derek's face went white. "What are you talking about? This is my home." "No, Derek, this is my home. My name is on the deed. My money built it. You signed a quitclaim waiving any ownership interest when we bought the property. Legally and financially, this house belongs to me and me alone. You can't just throw me out. I'm your husband. A husband who has been stealing from me for years. A husband who conspired with his mother to take my grandmother's jewelry and mock me behind my back. A husband who has never contributed meaningfully to our household, but has always expected to benefit from my success." I walked to the front door and opened it, a clear signal that this conversation was ending. "I'm filing for divorce on Monday. Until then, you can sleep in the guest room. Your mother can stay in the guest house until the 30-day notice period expires. After that, if either of you is still on my property, I'll have you removed by the sheriff." Linda stormed toward the door, her face contorted with rage. "You're going to regret this, Rachel. You think you're so smart, so successful, but you're nothing without my son. Just a lonely woman with a career and no family. I have family." My voice was quiet but firm. "I have the memory of my grandmother, who taught me to know my worth. I have friends who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. I have a legacy of strong Black women who built something from nothing and passed it down to me. What I don't have, what I refuse to have any longer, is people in my life who see me as nothing more than a source of resources to be exploited." Derek lingered after his mother left, his expression cycling through various attempts at manipulation. Remorse, bargaining, anger, pleading. I watched it all with a detachment that surprised me. I had loved this man once. I had built a life with him, shared a bed with him, imagined growing old beside him. But the man standing before me now was a stranger, someone whose true character had been hidden behind a mask of charm and dependency. "Rachel, please. We can work through this. I made a mistake. I know that. But we can go to counseling. We can fix this." "There is nothing to fix, Derek. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice over and over again for years. You chose to steal from me. You chose to give my heritage to your mother. You chose to lie to my face every single day. Those aren't mistakes. Those are decisions that reveal who you really are. So that's it? 6 years of marriage and you're just throwing it away over some old jewelry?" I stared at him, genuinely amazed at his inability to understand. It was never about the jewelry. It was about respect. It was about trust. It was about the basic decency of not stealing from your wife and mocking her behind her back. If you couldn't manage that, then there was never really a marriage to throw away. I pointed toward the stairs. "Guest room. Tonight? Tomorrow you can start looking for an apartment." He left without another word, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I closed and locked the front door, then leaned against it, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of what I had just done. My marriage was over. My home would soon be empty of the people who had occupied it for years. I was facing a divorce, a legal battle, and the complete restructuring of my life. But beneath the exhaustion, beneath the grief and anger and shock, I felt something else. Relief. The terrible burden of pretending, of maintaining a fiction of a happy marriage, of tolerating disrespect for the sake of peace, that burden was gone. I had spoken my truth. I had defended my boundaries. I had honored my grandmother's memory by refusing to accept treatment she would never have accepted. The next 30 days would be difficult. The legal proceedings would be complicated. The emotional aftermath would take years to fully process. But I had taken the first step, the hardest step, and I had discovered that I was strong enough to take it. My grandmother's courage stone was still in Linda's possession, but the courage itself had been in me all along. The 30 days that followed the confrontation were among the strangest of my life. Derek moved into the guest room as instructed, and for the first week, he maintained an attitude of wounded dignity, speaking to me only when necessary and in tones of injured martyrdom. He seemed to believe that if he waited long enough, I would relent, that my anger would fade, my resolve would weaken, and things would return to the comfortable imbalance he had enjoyed for years. When it became clear that I was serious, his strategy shifted. He began attempting reconciliation, leaving flowers on the kitchen counter, cooking dinners I had not asked for, suggesting couples therapy and weekend getaways and all the things he had never bothered to offer when he thought our marriage was secure. I accepted none of it. The flowers went in the trash. The dinners went uneaten. The suggestions were met with silence. Linda, meanwhile, launched a campaign of reputation destruction. She called every member of Derek's extended family to share her version of events, painting me as a controlling, materialistic woman who had thrown her devoted husband out over a misunderstanding about some old costume jewelry. She conveniently omitted the theft, the years of deception, the documented betrayal. In her telling, she was the victim, Derek was the victim, and I was the villain who had destroyed a happy family over nothing. Some family members believed her. Derek's Aunt Carolyn called to lecture me about the importance of forgiveness and family unity. His cousin Marcus sent a long email about how marriage required sacrifice and compromise, as if I were the one who had failed to sacrifice and compromise. I responded to none of them. I had learned that defending yourself to people who have already made up their minds is a waste of energy. But not everyone sided with Linda. Derek's uncle Raymond, a retired attorney who had always treated me with genuine warmth, called to ask for my side of the story. When I told him the truth, with evidence, his silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Within a week, the family grapevine had begun to carry a different narrative. The truth has a way of emerging, even when people try to bury it. The legal proceedings moved forward with the efficiency that Melissa had promised. I filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting an equitable division of assets, which in our case meant that I kept everything I had brought into the marriage and earned during it. Derek, through his hastily hired attorney, attempted to claim entitlement to the house, the cars, and a portion of my retirement savings. Melissa demolished each claim with the documentation I had gathered. The house was my separate property. The cars were titled in my name alone. My retirement accounts were funded entirely by my own contributions from my own income. When his attorney realized the weakness of Derek's position, settlement negotiations began in earnest. Derek would leave the marriage with his personal belongings, his modest bank account, and nothing else. No alimony, no property division, no share of the life I had built with my own hands and my own talent. The jewelry case proceeded on a separate track. I filed a police report, and Detective Williams, a thorough woman who seemed personally offended by the nature of the theft, conducted a comprehensive investigation. She interviewed Linda, who initially denied everything before being confronted with the emails and surveillance footage. She interviewed Derek, who attempted to minimize his role before realizing that the evidence was incontrovertible. She traced several pieces to Linda's safe deposit box and others to her home, where they were found displayed openly, as if they had always belonged there. Linda was given a choice by the district attorney: return all stolen property and agree to a civil settlement, or face felony charges for receiving stolen goods. The prospect of a criminal record and potential jail time proved more persuasive than her sense of entitlement. Within 2 weeks, every piece of my grandmother's jewelry was back in my possession. I remember the moment Detective Williams placed the sapphire pendant in my hand. I held it up to the light, watching the deep blue stone catch the sun, and I felt my grandmother's presence as surely as if she were standing beside me. This pendant had touched her skin, had rested against her heart, had witnessed her joys and sorrows and triumphs. It was home now, where it belonged, where it would stay. The eviction process was less dramatic than I had anticipated. On the 29th day, a moving truck arrived at the guest house, and Linda's belongings were loaded with the silent efficiency of hired labor. She did not speak to me, did not even look in my direction as she supervised the packing of the furniture and decorations she had accumulated during her rent-free years on my property. Derek helped her, carrying boxes and directing movers, playing the role of devoted son one final time. I watched from my kitchen window, sipping coffee and feeling nothing but a profound sense of rightness. They were moving to a 2-bedroom apartment across town, a rental that would consume most of Linda's Social Security income and required Derek to actually contribute financially to his own living situation for the first time in years. The luxury they had enjoyed at my expense was over. The lifestyle they had taken for granted was gone. When the truck pulled away, carrying the last remnants of my failed marriage, I walked through the empty guest house one final time. The space felt lighter somehow, as if a heaviness had been removed along with the furniture. I made a mental note to renovate it eventually, perhaps convert it into a home office or a studio space, something that would serve my own needs rather than the needs of people who had never appreciated my generosity. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. I sat in the courtroom beside Melissa, watching as the judge reviewed our settlement agreement and declared our marriage dissolved. Derek sat on the other side of the aisle with his attorney, looking diminished in a way that had nothing to do with his physical appearance. The confident, charming man I had married had been replaced by someone smaller, someone whose sense of self had been built on a foundation of other people's resources. I felt no satisfaction in his defeat. I felt no vindication in his reduced circumstances. What I felt was simply closure. The end of a chapter that should have ended years ago, had I been willing to see the truth that was always there. The months that followed were a time of reconstruction. I threw myself into my work, accepting projects that challenged me and collaborating with colleagues who inspired me. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage, women who had known me before Derek and who welcomed me back without judgment. I began therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I had allowed myself to be treated so poorly for so long, and how I could prevent it from happening again. My therapist helped me see patterns I had been blind to. The way I had been conditioned to accept disrespect as normal, the way I had confused being needed with being valued, the way I had given and given and given, believing that generosity would eventually be reciprocated, when in reality it had only taught certain people that they could take without consequence. 6 months after the divorce, I received a message from Derek through social media. He wanted to talk, he said. He had been doing some reflection, some soul-searching. He understood now how wrong he had been, how badly he had treated me. He wondered if there was any possibility of reconciliation, or at least friendship. I read his message twice, considered it carefully, and then deleted it without responding. Some doors, once closed, should remain closed. Some chapters, once ended, should not be reopened. Derek had made his choices, and those choices had consequences. Letting him back into my life in any capacity would be letting him believe that betrayal could eventually be forgiven if enough time passed. I chose instead to honor my grandmother's memory by living a life she would have been proud of. I wore her sapphire pendant to the opening of a community center I had designed for an underserved neighborhood in South Atlanta. I wore her ruby earrings to mentor young Black women interested in architecture. I wore her emerald ring, her courage stone, every day, letting it remind me that I came from a lineage of strength and resilience and unyielding dignity. My revenge, if it could be called that, was not leaving Derek and Linda homeless. My revenge was simply refusing to continue providing a home to people who did not deserve one. The homelessness, such as it was not a punishment I inflicted. It was a natural consequence of their own choices, the inevitable result of building a life on exploitation rather than genuine contribution. The house on Cascade Road is still mine. The guest house has been converted into a design studio where I work on personal projects and mentor young architects. The jewelry box that once sat in my bedroom now occupies a place of honor in my home office, where I can see it every day, where I can remember the women who wore these pieces before me and draw strength from their memory. I think about my grandmother often. I think about what she would say if she could see me now, if she could know that her courage stone had found its way back to her granddaughter's hand. I believe she would tell me that she is proud, that she always knew I had the strength to protect myself, that the legacy she left me was never really about the jewelry at all, but about the values embedded in each piece, the stories of survival and dignity, and the unshakable knowledge of one's own worth. I am Rachel Denise Thompson, named for my grandmother's mother, carrying forward a legacy that spans generations. I am an architect who builds beautiful spaces for people to live and work and dream. I am a Black woman who refuses to accept disrespect from anyone, no matter how close they claim to be. And I am finally fully at peace.